Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Fronteras, a Changing America. I'm Anthony Moreno. According to information from the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative in 2018, New Mexico exported $3.7 billion of made-in-America goods to the world. That was an increase of 31% from its export level a decade before that in 2008. That's also before the pandemic. Here to give us a better understanding of trade and economic development at the border is Jerry Pacheco. He is president and CEO of the Border Industrial Association and executive director of the International Business Accelerator. He also has a syndicated column, Business Across Borders. Jerry, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Anthony. Thank you.
Well, I want to start off with that. How has the pandemic impacted economic development and trade here in New Mexico's southern border?
From an export standpoint, our exports, comparing 2020 to 2019, 2019 was a record year for us. But our exports across the board were down 21% in 2020, mostly because of the pandemic. But on the bright side, our exports to Mexico, which are comprise the largest part of our export in general, are only down 8%. The trade war with China that we're experiencing as a nation is really impacting our exports to Asia. And that seems to be a major factor of why we saw such a fall last year. But from a construction standpoint at the border here, 2020, I tell everybody, was the best year we've ever had in terms of recruiting new companies and constructing new space. Between 2020 and 2021, we will have constructed, or we will be constructing, 1.33 million square feet of new space down here at the border.
Now, that sounds pretty exciting to folks who are especially interested in more jobs coming to the area. Now, you mentioned the trade war with China. Has that impacted how current businesses there at the border are making their future plans?
Well, it's interesting. We think that because of that trade war with China, that puts us in a position to seize an opportunity. For example, in the last 2 years, we recruited 3 companies based out of Taiwan. And all 3 of them are really hedging their bets because they're kind of caught between China and the United States. They want to have a presence in Asia, but they also want to have a presence in the United States because a lot of the products that they're manufacturing would be hit by a 35% tariff, which could make them very non-competitive or uncompetitive rather with their competition.
Now, you mentioned the growth that was being planned there and companies that are coming in. Can you kind of give us an understanding of what sorts of jobs are going to be coming into the area?
Well, we have, I'll rattle off some companies here. We have Admiral Cable, which was the first Taiwanese company that we recruited. That's going to be making power cables and multi-outlet strips. We have Zentria, which is the second Taiwanese company we recruited. They are going to be making semi-truck trailer walls. If you can imagine a semi-truck trailer, the walls are what they manufacture. We also have Symmetric, which is a barcode label manufacturer, also from Taiwan. We have a PPE company called Prent that's coming to build 120,000 square foot space here to manufacture gloves like for surgeries and what have you. W Silver Recycling is building a 120,000 square foot building here. They have a major footprint in Santa Teresa, but they're going to expand that footprint. Plus, we just completed building about 500,000 square feet of new speculative space, 315,000 by a company out of Dallas, Texas, and 183,000 by Franklin Mountain Industrial, which is an El Paso based company. So a lot of activity happening here at the border.
So what did the pandemic, I mean, obviously there's a lot of concern about COVID-19, and with factories, you have concern about people being safe. So they can slow the spread of COVID-19 or stop it altogether. What challenges are companies facing there right now during this pandemic?
Well, just keeping employees safe. A lot of companies, for example, that weren't operating a third shift started adding a third shift. That way, you space your employees apart better. A lot of protocol in terms of hygiene and keeping people socially distant. We also embarked through the Border Industrial Association. One of our members that we really took advantage of during the pandemic here is the hospitals at Providence. We conducted a company by company vaccination program, which was just wonderful. That the whole workforce of a certain company could sign up and very quickly get vaccinated over here in the hospitals of Providence. So a lot of PPE being acquired in our industrial base. And the irony, Anthony, is that as we come out of this bad recession and we try to put the pandemic behind us, our businesses are trying to expand their production as quickly as possible because we have a big automotive manufacturing presence here, and we have a big consumer electronics sector here, and those areas are expanding. So we really need companies to expand their production here, but we are experiencing certain barriers. It's very hard to find employees to come work. You can come to the industrial parks down here and you're going to see companies with now hiring signs all over the place, and we're scrambling to find employees.
So what's the big challenge on hiring employees, and what are the roadblocks?
It's the same that I think everybody else is experiencing. A lot of people are preferring not to come back to the workforce because their unemployment check and their stimulus checks are just too good to give up to go back to the workforce. Then you also have kind of a fear by a lot of people during the pandemic that they don't want to be in a production operation that has 200 employees, for example, even if they're vaccinated. So that was why we tried to do a company by company vaccination program so everybody can feel a lot safer. That doesn't mean that protocol goes out the window. We're still wearing masks down here and we're still trying to keep apart, but it makes it a lot easier and it eases the minds of the employees to know that their fellow employees in that production plant are vaccinated.
Now, with the U.S.-Mexico border being closed, except for essential business, how did that impact business, and does that still continue to do so today?
It impacts a lot of the retail. It doesn't impact our production base so much because if you have, let's say, there's a lot of Americans living in Mexico that cross the border to come to the United States to work every day. They are allowed to cross. Americans can go into Mexico and come back without being, detained or what have you. On the other hand, if there are Mexican workers in a production plant, let's say across the border in Juarez, that's related to one of our plants, it is a little more complicated. They have to get a letter from the company allowing them to come in to work in the United States or come to a meeting or whatever. And customs has to approve that. They're at the border. Where we're really seeing an impact is in the retail sector and the tourism sector. Non-essential Mexican citizens, non-essential meaning they're not deemed essential for a job or what have you, cannot come in and shop at Walmart like they used to. And you're seeing that impact the retail sector. They can come in if they have a doctor's appointment or there's some extenuating circumstance, but they cannot come in like we were seeing them in numbers, come in and shop at Walmart, go to to an entertainment district or what have you. That's a sector that's really been impacted.
Now, there was recent news about the U.S. Census Bureau releasing their findings on New Mexico and the demographic change that the state has had. And according to the Census Bureau, New Mexico was one of the slowest growing states in the West over the past decade. I think they're just behind Wyoming out of all the Western states. How does this concern you, being someone that is recruiting businesses to this state?
It's very disconcerting because as it is, we have a labor shortage. And if we're not growing our population base, we're going to see labor shortages continue in the future. In my last column, I think it was a little controversial. I deemed it ironic that we have these waves of asylum seekers and people from other countries trying to come to the United States, want to work, start a new life. And here we are with the labor shortage, where you'd have general plant managers in our industrial base, dying to get those people trained and in a position where they can be a productive element. If we don't figure out a way to grow our population in New Mexico, our economy's not going to grow. If our economy doesn't grow, we're not going to provide opportunities for our kids who want to stay in New Mexico. So it's a vicious cycle here, and we need to really put a lot of thought in how we go forward in that sense.
So, I mean, when you're talking to CEOs of businesses who are interested in coming to the state and relocating to the southern port of entry there, so what are the things that they're looking at that they need to have for them to really make that decision and jump to come to New Mexico?
Three things: labor, labor, labor. There is no more important factor. It's not incentives. We have great incentives to lure and attract businesses to Mexico. We have great incentives. We share a border with Mexico. It's a huge advantage in recruiting companies that are tied to the other side of the border. But when we don't make the final cut on a deal, it's because there's a perception that we don't have enough skilled labor and that they're not readily available here at the border. We have to educate people that a certain percentage of our population in labor base here in the industrial region is coming from El Paso. And that's a positive. That's not a negative. And I know sometimes I've been kind of criticized up in Santa Fe by legislators saying, well, why are you giving all the jobs to the Texans? Well, we're not giving all the jobs to the Texans. It's roughly a 50-50 percentage New Mexican versus Texan employees in our base. Number one, my thought has always been, hey, a company has a right to hire the best people it can hire. If it decides that some people from Texas are better qualified and that helps the company be productive and survive, they should hire those people. But we really make a concerted effort to hold job fairs, to work with the Workforce Solutions Department to get New Mexicans in front of those jobs. So we try to educate companies and CEOs that we're recruiting. Look, don't worry about that. We're going to help you with the labor. It's going to come from New Mexico and it's going to come from Texas.
Now, you mentioned migrants coming to the U.S. The U.S. has seen a dramatic rise in people seeking asylum into the U.S. in recent months. The Biden administration has been under a lot of criticism. In April, unaccompanied minors who were coming to the U.S., the number dropped slightly, but it was still very, very high. How does this impact the port there in Santa Teresa and your mission there?
It really does impact us, because what happens is, contrary to what a lot of people think, that undocumented people are swarming the fences and climbing over in the middle of the desert, the vast majority of them are coming to ports of entry to seek asylum. They're coming to ports of entry. That affects our industrial base greatly, in the sense that when you get waves of people, or the twosies and threesies coming in, that requires a Customs and Border Protection officer to get off the line, receive those people, record those people, and get them to, let's say, a medical attention or a medical exam or what have you. So what that does, it slows our traffic at the port of entry in terms of commercial traffic. And it becomes a disruption, and it slows things down. When you slow things down, that becomes a problem with tight supply chains that we have developed over the years. So those immigrants, even though they don't affect us directly, they affect us indirectly in terms of port traffic.
So what are some ways that you think lawmakers can address this issue?
Well, I've been an advocate for fixing the broken visa system that we have here. I mean, granted, our visa system has been based on limited numbers of visas that are given to people. And apart from the agricultural sector, generally, if you are a foreigner and you want to come to the United States on a work visa, you have to have a certain amount of skills. You have to be an engineer. You might have to have vast business experience. You might have to have medical experience. If you're just, let's say, a laborer who can be trained, it's very, very hard for you to obtain a visa. And we've really limited that. And Congress has been playing with that issue like a hot potato. Congress and the executive branch, they failed to fix that. We could accept quite a few more immigrants. And our labor market indicates that there's plenty of room for them to come in, not take American jobs. I mean, in our case here, if the Americans wanted to work, they would be knocking on our door here in a labor shortage. And even after the pandemic subsides, we're still going to have that labor shortage here. So Congress and the president need to address that. We've been just punting that football for the better part of 20 years.
So with the port of entry, though, the structure itself, how do you feel that it can be updated to meet the challenges and goals of the 21st century when it comes to business and trade?
We need to get money, whether it's earmark or on the appropriations list. And we're all working with our congressional delegation. Our little port of Santa Teresa is now, I think, the sixth or seventh most important port on the entire U.S.-Mexico border. And we were fifth before 2020, but the two commercial El Paso ports are reporting individually now. And each one is a bigger port than we are. That little port has only received one minor upgrade, adding a third commercial lane and some HVAC equipment since it was opened in 1993. And our port of entry is routinely crossing more than 600 northbound trucks a day. And during December, it was 850 a day. Our port director, Fernando Tomé, and his staff are just wonderful. I mean, they are logistical geniuses in getting that truck traffic across so quickly. We average less than 30 minutes to cross a truck versus El Paso and other ports of entry, which could be 2 hours to 6 hours. But we're gonna hit the wall at that port of entry. We have a little port of entry that was opened in 1993 for the traffic back then that is doing 30, 40 times as much as we were doing way back then. So we need to get the port redesigned. We got to get money, and we got to reconstruct that port of entry so we don't have bottlenecks. And so the international trade sector and the recruitment sector that we've thrived on here at the border can continue. If not, we're going to hit a wall.
Now, lawmakers are always proposing solutions when it comes to trade across our border or border security. Are there any pieces of legislation that you think people should pay attention to when it comes to that right now?
Well, one piece of legislation that I thought was really neat, that's kind of a pilot deal, was former Congresswoman Xochitl Torres Small introduced a non-invasive inspection system, whereby we're using technology to assist our officials at the border in inspecting cargo. So little of a percentage of all crossings are adequately inspected. We have a higher percentage here at Santa Teresa than an average port of entry, which could be as low as 15%. So there could potentially be a lot of hazardous things in cargo that's not inspected, a lot of contraband. And NII, the non-invasive inspection, is a way to use technology to place it at our ports of entry to better inspect and protect the citizens of the United States. And so I'm excited to see how that's gonna roll out here.
Now I want to talk with you a little bit more about trade. Now, the United States, Mexico, Canada agreement, some call it the new NAFTA. Can you give us an update on how that's going right now?
All of us down here just say NAFTA. It's kind of hard to go to the new acronym here. It seems to be rolling out all right. I always tell people that it's more of a collective sigh of relief that it got negotiated and we can go back to our lives, you know? A lot of the targets in terms of North American content that you have to have in your products, particularly in the automotive industry, went up from 62.5% to 75%. And for trucks and light trucks, there's a certain amount of labor component that has to be earning more than $16 an hour. Well, every automotive company I talk to, I say, are you going to meet those criteria? Because if they don't meet those criteria, then rather than free trade occurring, there's going to be a tariff on that product going back and forth across the border. And a lot of the companies I talk to say we're never going to get to 75% content. So what are you going to do, I ask? Well, we're just going to pay the tariff. Okay, you're going to eat the tariff. No, we're not going to eat the tariff. We're going to pass it on down the line until the consumer ultimately pays for that tariff. And that's going to make our vehicles a little bit more expensive. It's a noble goal. We want to have products that we trade between Canada, the United States, and Mexico have a certain amount of North American content. That implies that we have our native companies here in North America participating in the success of NAFTA. However, there's a lot of companies that are not going to meet that goal, and they're just going to pass that tariff that they're going to have to pay to you and me.
Now, speaking of vehicles, there's been a high demand for new automobiles across the country. There's also been a global shortage of microchips, computer microchips. How is this impacting business there? Is it making an impact?
It is causing disruptions in the supply chain. I gave an example the other day to a person I was talking to. We have, for example, automotive companies that supply everything from foam for your, all the soft stuff in your interior to textiles for your seats. They're not directly involved in acquiring, the microchips or what have you. But if they're supplying a big automotive manufacturer, for example, in Mexico, and that manufacturer is having trouble getting those chips to build a car, they're not going to need those automotive textiles or that foam for your headliner. And all of a sudden you have like a start-stop kind of situation here where it's almost day by day, whether we resume production at 100% or we have to cut it back to 50% or whatever. So those disruptions are serious. And because we're such a major production base in the El Paso, Juarez, Santa Teresa region, that does affect us here greatly. So it is kind of encouraging that Intel is going to be investing, $3.6 billion in the Rio Rancho plant that it was kind of mothballing. That's great for New Mexico, and that's great for us to supply that product, which is so important to us to be able to build cars and cell phones and consumer electronics.
Now, in this year, New Mexico lawmakers and the governor signed a bill to make marijuana legal for adult use in the state. Now, Mexico is considering similar legislation to legalize adult use marijuana. Can you kind of give us your thoughts on this issue and how it could possibly impact, not only New Mexico, but Mexico in general, and some things to consider when it comes to this issue?
Well, in New Mexico, I would hate to be the regulation and licensing director to put the protocol and policies together. I mean, starting next month, a household can legally have 12 plants, marijuana plants. And then by next April, the recreational field is open. So we're scrambling here in New Mexico. And for us, it's going to be an interesting issue, Anthony, because where we are down here, you can't tell whether you're in New Mexico or Texas. A Texan can cross over the border to, let's say, a dispensary in New Mexico, acquire that product legally in New Mexico, but then take it back to Texas, and that's illegal. So law enforcement on both sides of the New Mexico-Texas border are going to have to figure it out. In Mexico, the Senate is one step away from approving legalizing marijuana across the board. And I think Mexico would be the third country to do so. It's Canada and another country that I can't recall. But they are in the same position we are, because if the Senate signs the marijuana bill in Mexico, the president, even though he's not really big on marijuana, will sign that. He's already indicated that he probably signed that bill. They're going to have to scramble. I mean, how do you account for, let's say, a lot of the Europeans and Americans who are going to Mexico, to Cancun, to Acapulco, Mazatlan? And does this become another sector of tourism, which is the marijuana tourism that's going down there? And then how do you deal with the foreigners? What are the legal options in dealing with bad trips, with unruly people? Can you have it on the beach? That kind of stuff. It's just mind-boggling how much has to go into the thought of developing protocol, not only on this side of the border, but our neighbors down south.
Staying with the issue in Mexico, I mean, do you see this being a way to possibly help the economy there in the country? We just have about a minute and a half left.
It's a double-edged sword, Anthony, because at face value, you think so, right? Because let's say you attract foreigners cross the border, go to Juarez to enjoy the marijuana, whatever. But at the same time, you've already got an established economy with the growers in what's called the Golden Triangle over here in Sinaloa, Chihuahua, and Sonora that are already part of the economy. They're just growing the marijuana illegally. What is this legalization going to do to them? Do they become part of the legal economy of the growing and selling of marijuana? What does the cartel do to them at this point in time? So there's a lot of farmers in Mexico that are growing marijuana that are very scared as to the consequences to them.
Okay, we just have about 30 seconds left, but I'd like to hear from you. What are your concerns with this pandemic over the next 6 months in your field right now on the border?
It is labor, because even though we get out of the pandemic, as we're going out of the pandemic, we have companies that just need to ramp up production. It's not easy to just say, okay, I need 30 people, let's hire them off the street. That takes time to train them and make them productive. So it's going to be several months before we're up to speed and being able to produce where we need to produce.
Jerry Pacheco is president and CEO of the Border Industrial Association. He is also the executive director of the International Business Accelerator, and his syndicated column is Business Across Borders. Jerry, thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you for having me.
And we want to thank you for joining us on Fronteras, a Changing America. I'm Anthony Morneau. We'll see you next time.